All right. I believe this means we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, tech fans of all shapes and sorts and sizes and persuasions, welcome to another episode of the Monday Morning Tech Chat Show on the SGGQA podcast channel. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, aka Some Gadget Guy, the SGG of this terribly named podcast series. One of the worst podcast names, I think, in the history of podcasts, but the QA, I'm sticking to that. Because that's the important part, stands obviously for questions and answers, as we like to make this an interactive conversation. I'm already seeing some amazing names here in the chat as we lead into what's going to be a bit of a shorter show. One, because my voice is just starting to heal up, but I still have this like nagging little persistent cough, and I'm going to give myself a bit of a break. But two, this is also June 10th. This is WWDC day, and Apple so rudely always interrupts my podcast whenever they feel like they've got to make an announcement. They're always like, "Oh, what's that Juan guy doing? Let's make sure we poop all over his show." It's like Apple, they're so punitive. Am I right? Oh, man. So we're going to be capping this. Obviously, this is normally like a 2 to 3 hour podcast. In about an hour, Apple's going to be taking the stage for WWDC, and I've got videos I need to work on since my voice is doing a little bit better. So I probably won't watch a lot of WWDC. I'll have it on, but I don't think I'm going to be. See, the thing that kind of sucks is when there would be like a keynote, I would often go to like Twitter. I would like live tweet because this sort of like temporary, disposable, short form messaging that's kind of like what Twitter was just like excelled at. I don't remember which one it was. I want to say it was one of the Google keynotes. It might have been last year's I/O, not this year's I/O. But no, I can't remember. Anyway, so I stopped live tweeting on Twitter. I can't remember what the last live tweet event was, but I tried one on Threads, and I actually tried to lean into what Threads should be. It's a threaded conversation, and I tried live threading, and it got like no attention. So Threads still wants you to do like top level threads for every single message if you want anyone to see what you're posting, which defeats the purpose of having that threaded interactive kind of conversational tone. Short story, incredibly long. I'll have it on. I'll be working on some videos. I don't know that this is going to do it for me to hear yet another massive, humongous, big data tech corporation sucking up all of your user data and then using it in AI products. I feel like Apple being late to this game is a bad look for Apple. But we'll get into that. We're actually going to talk about what some of the things we might expect to see at WWDC. And if I were a betting man, I would be checking out, like the Vegas odds, like how many times will Apple say AI during the presentation and how many times will they try to change the definition of AI? So instead of artificial intelligence, it's Apple intelligence. See, it's AI. And I bet you that joke gets really played out. Oh, JFR, black coffee is good for that cough. That's my remedy for myself. Got to be careful with black coffee because it can also be sort of a mild diuretic. It can kind of dehydrate you, where I'm trying to get what lingering gunk out of my system. It's just persisting. I've gone through three different kinds of COVID tests now, and all of them have turned up negative. And I don't know. It's just this weird little head cold that kind of settled into my lungs, and it really sucks. And people are gross, and I don't like it. So, JMan150. I wonder if this time they'll count the amount of times they said AI and mentioned it like Google did. And how funny would it be if they just kind of copied that gag, but a bunch of Apple people don't watch Google I/O, so they go, see, like, Apple doesn't take themselves too seriously. Oh my gosh, what a funny little gag. Oh, Tim Cook, he's so funny. Yeah, Kapakash, Apple intelligence is so corny, and you know it's that kind of flavor of corny that that it's gonna get played. It's gonna get played out. So, we it's already 9:05. I feel like I'm already running out of time, and there are some things that I do want us to talk about. But I hope everybody had a lovely weekend. We took a kind of a chill weekend. I got lots of chores done. I got a new laptop stand. It's a really cheap laptop stand. It's got a fan built into the base. It kind of elevates the laptop. And you'll notice that as I'm looking at my monitors, I'm kind of swinging my head a little further. You might notice like the light on my face is even a little bit more intense because I've had to separate my dual monitor setup because I really want to see when we get Windows on ARM laptops, I'm going to put my Windows on ARM laptop right here in the middle, just under my camera here, and go triple monitor and see if I can use this to replace the massive workstation under my desk from day one. I want to see if I can just hit the ground running. So it's going to be funny. Like, literally, the first thing I'm going to shoot is kind of like an unboxing and a first look. And you've seen Surface laptops, so I don't think that's going to be particularly exciting. You know what the laptop is going to look like. But literally, the second thing I'm going to shoot is some kind of short form video about how to disable Windows Recall, like literally screen grabbing it from the Surface laptop. And that's one of our topics today, is talking about the Windows Recall backlash. Oh, and hey, Matt Lamb. Yay, catching live for the first time in a while. Well, I'm glad you could jump in. I'm glad you could stream it live. JMan150 wasn't too sure if your stream would have been on today. One, I'd commented on Joe and Sam's stream last night saying that I wasn't too sure if it would been or not because Dub was going to be on. I can't even ironically call it Dub. I can't make it a quirky colloquialism for a $3 trillion market cap company. I'm sorry. They're just not cute, and they're not plucky little upstarts. I can't play that game anymore. It's not fun. So anyway, oh, Hassam, I mean, it's inevitable that they will. We need to see how. Hassam, this is a good point. I'm sorry, I'm not arguing your comment here. I just hope Apple doesn't fall for the same nonsense Google and Microsoft fell for when it comes to AI shenanigans. They're in bed with OpenAI. Their big announced partnership is using OpenAI for some things. They still have some kind of deal brewing with Google Gemini. It's funny, like, they're probably not going to do the exact same shenanigans because they don't have their own AI platform. So they're just going to be beholden to Google and Microsoft and OpenAI and ChatGPT for their own AI shenanigans. Like, it's really not a great look if you think this future of language learning models has some value. If you think that there's something there beyond just shareholder investor bait, kind of a rug pull for people dumping money into these companies. If you think that this is the gig, if you think this is the future of computing, Apple is way behind, and they don't have a solution ready for any kind of public consumption. So not only are they gonna fall for the same they're a part of the same shenanigans. They haven't even built up the repertoire to make their own new shenanigans. They're just a part of the current shenanigans. I like saying, uh-oh, shenanigans. Let me take a quick sip of coffee here. I'm gonna try and get ahead of throat issues and not surprise myself with coughs. Hold on one second. Okay, so, yes. Getting ahead of WWDC, we'll chat out what our predictions are a little later in the podcast. But I do want to knock out a little housekeeping because a lot of stuff went public. So I like to prep things on Patreon, patreon.com/somegadgetguy, and eventually kind of roll out articles and stuff for somegadgetguy.com. My own personal website. So some of these shorts have been going up on YouTube and Instagram. I kind of tapped into 2 viral Instagram shorts, like boosted. To date, I've not quite doubled my followers on Instagram, and I think I've generated something like 1.2 million plays off of 2 reels, excuse me, on Instagram, and that doesn't mean anything. It means literally nothing. It doesn't change anything about monetization or ad revenue or healthy engagements. There's no audience looking for my stuff or checking out my photos. Like if I post a photo, it gets like 10 likes. But I have two reels that now I can show marketers like, oh, see, I went viral and now you need to give me money for ad integration. Nonsense. The influencer economy is a raging dumpster fire of vile, hateful expectations of marketing. That being said, I did appreciate that I seemed to have struck a nerve. And the second one that kind of got a little influx of viewership and followers and stuff like that was talking about Windows recall and how this is going to be a security problem for Mac and Linux users too. I did not share that Instagram reel on Mastodon. I just wrote up a little, hey, I just thought of it this way. And then that on Mastodon blew up. It's roughly at around 2,000 shares with like 1,500 likes and numerous comments. It's the first time I think I've ever posted something on a social media platform where it got more active participation shares than it did likes. So, I mean, like, I always love it when someone just kind of clicks the thumbs up or the heart or the star button, but like, that doesn't really mean anything, and it doesn't really expose something to a broader audience. So on Mastodon, that's doubly true. There is no algorithm that tracks likes. So it's a bigger deal when you start getting shared for something like that. And it was just kind of a plucky little, hey, I don't know if you thought about it this way, but Windows recall could be a total disaster. And everybody went, yes, that guy. Now, surprisingly, a video that is grossly underperforming for me right now. I think it's only gotten like 1,000 views since I published it last week. I shot a OnePlus 12R versus Pixel 8a mid-ranger battle, the two most exciting phones at around $500 in North America, and there's no interest in this video. It totally tanked. I guess people don't care about $500 phones or performance or comparisons, all these things that we've been saying that even tech junkies are super into, has basically just been a total no-go. Flip side of that, I wrote this editorial first on the Patreon. Suing Apple is a necessary step in challenging our perception of big tech. And it's a long written editorial just kind of talking about my own experiences coming up as an Apple fanboy. I became an Apple product specialist for a technology supplier, and then kind of how I made a turn when Apple started changing up their business model. And for my blog, which has been getting almost no traffic, like over the last year, search and discoverability for my articles has just fallen off a cliff. Articles that usually get just kind of good trickle traffic throughout the year have just completely vanished. And this one all of a sudden spiked. So it was, again, yet another moment of something is in the air and there's some kind of pulse that I kind of stepped on here. And there was this big interest in like, oh, yeah, I think maybe Apple is due a market correction. If you go to Threads, you just have a bunch of people going, no, Apple's the bestest because they use encryption. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. That's so adorable. But outside of Threads specifically, you kind of open up this other audience of people that are just not happy across the board. They're not happy with Google. They're definitely not happy with Amazon. They're not happy with Microsoft. And they're also not happy with Apple. It seems like a general trend of in-poopification is reaching the upper level perception of these massive tech companies. And the only people that are really defending these business practices are the worst of the worst of the loudest knights for their brand. If you're a Samsung knight, if you're an Apple knight, if you're a Google knight, I don't know that there is an Amazon knight. Maybe there is. I have not met them. Maybe I just haven't been criticizing Amazon publicly enough. But sorry. The hilarious part of all of that is like reaching out to all these people, these articles getting read. I mean, like seeing my stats just skyrocket from month over month. This one article is just kind of kicked in this kind of interest and this kind of popularity. And again, I don't think I'm saying anything too radical. I think it's just a matter of timing where we're all exhausted And we're all a little fed up with this current presentation of consumer tech, that it's not really doing what we want it to do. So, wrapping up, hold on one second. Wrapping up my housekeeping here. Why isn't it screen sharing? Oh, there we go. I also got a video out on the GameSir X4 Aileron phone controller. It's a backbone style controller with no backbone. There's no spine, so I was really excited to play with that. And then lastly, I wrote one more editorial over the weekend. See, I get real persnickety about a trend. So I'm not calling out any one specific tech publication. But when I see a couple of articles that start doing the same hack thing, I feel like that's worth mentioning. It's like another example would be every tech reviewer who just can't possibly figure out how Sony phones are named. I'm so wacky and quirky. Is it Suspiria 1II? How do you even say it? Oh, but I shot this on a Sony a7S III. You know, like that nonsense. And you see that trend play out because it plays to the bias of their audience. It confirms that their audience who doesn't buy Sony phones are smart and clever, and they pat themselves on the back for buying the gooder phones. And if Sony's were gooder phones, then they would buy them, but they're not because they're not gooder enough. So that's playing out right now with Android trackers. I've got my little collection of Pebble Bees and Chipolos. A few of these I still haven't taken out of the box because I'm kind of planning how I'm going to set these up to get as much data as I possibly can as quickly as I can. We've had access to them for about 2 weeks. And when I say we've had access to them, the first batch have only started shipping to people who pre-ordered a year ago. And then some of these kits have been sent out to guys like me who review products, and consumers are just starting to figure out that these are things that they can buy. At the same time, Google's tracker network has only just been refreshed. The app has not been updated for everybody in North America yet. And all of these hack comparisons are starting to come out like, but AirTags are betterer. AirTags just work. And none of these comparisons are highlighting the incredible harms that Apple has done to the market, the incredible bullying that Apple has successfully positioned their product with, all of the security issues that we've been pointing out that Google had to fix, and that Apple only begrudgingly updated their products for this year, about a month ago. And then they're still saying, oh, but like, it needed to hit the ground running. It's just not ready. The Find My network isn't good enough. And I guarantee you that if Google had done what Apple did and just made this a privacy and security nightmare, but opened up everything so that all of your data was just funneled directly into their service, these exact same hacks would be, oh, but Google needs to do better with privacy. Like Apple made some mistakes, but like Google should know better. And it's all nonsense. It's a new network that's getting up and running. It's going to take some time to get consumers updating their apps, and that the app works completely different than Apple's Find My service. And so I write in this editorial, this is how it's different. And you won't see that in any of these hack comparisons. So anytime you see someone who's like, oh, but AirTags are betterer and the Google trackers aren't good enough, you can pretty much ignore anything that that guy has to say after that article's been published. It's totally shilling into one idea that's just sort of a truthiness kind of idea. I know that Apple is good and Google data tracking is bad, and Apple, it's okay that they harvest all of my location data and make it easily accessible to API calls, but AirTags are encrypted. And that seems to be the big response that I get is Apple stands on Threads going, no, AirTags are the most secure because they're end-to-end encrypted. And you're like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what the actual security threat was. That's hilarious. So anyway, Brian Glaze. I even saw an article where a guy was arguing that Google wasn't waiting on Apple to fix the issue. Man was out of touch. We waited an entire year. I put my order in June 1st, 2023, and my pre-order was delivered June 1st, 2024. So that man speaking the nonsense, and this is what qualifies as tech conversation now. I mean, this is like what is so exhausting to folks like me trying to like just tread water in this current tech landscape is you see these hack editorials on major publications just like, well, we gave them a fair head to head. It's like, no, you didn't. Because the AirTags had a 3-year head start. Apple delayed Google's launch by a year. The app is only just rolling out to a broad enough consumer base for it to start working. So no, you haven't given it a fair comparison. And you haven't detailed why Apple was able to give themselves the incredible advantage that they were. So, sorry, I just read a comment from McCorcoran. Sorry, McCorcoran, that's a great comment, but I can't get sidetracked because I just realized housekeeping took us to 9:20 and I need to drink some more coffee and we're going to jump into some articles and then I'm going to let you all go. And if you want to watch WWDC and support a terrible company like Apple, then that's on you. Hold on one second. So this is the thing. I'm genuinely trying to live my life by not directly attacking end users, but man, those lines get real blurry when people get up in their feels on any kind of Apple corporation criticism. I had a conversation with one of my daughter's friends' fathers. It was totally like an amenable, like, well, hey, what do you do? And like, oh, I review tech products. Oh, that must be such a cool job. And like, do you get to play with all the new like iPhones and iPads? And you're like, I don't touch anything Apple. And that took us down a rabbit hole of like, his family is just kitted out Apple up to their eyeballs. Everything is Apple. And I am nothing Apple. And it was actually a really lovely conversation, just getting to express some of the pros and cons and why I'm concerned about doing business with these massive corporations and how Apple is holding tech in place. And he was like, yeah, I've been kind of feeling that. We haven't gotten a new iPad. I'm still on my M1 MacBook. They had iPhone 13 Pros, which again, I got to praise. Like, I think that's actually probably the best iPhone that's ever been made. He was like, yeah, well, thanks for saying that. I've been worried about spending more money on these newer ones. And you're like, well, I don't think you have to. Go get a battery replacement and you can keep your phone running until the end of its software support. And it was like, this was a guy who was diehard Apple talking to someone who was extremely Apple corporate antagonistic, basically saying the exact same thing. Basically saying, I'm tired of doing business with this company. And he was actively looking at, well, how do I keep these things running longer? To me, that is our greatest tactic, our greatest sort of warfare against big tech companies. Can you just keep your product running longer so that you're not giving them as much money for these terrible business practices? It would be lovely if there was some kind of completely off the grid kind of solution, and that's just not realistic in our modern economy. But what does hurt these companies is repairing these gadgets and running them longer so you're not buying and replacing as frequently or as often. And I feel many, many, many more consumers really reflect that kind of lifestyle now. I don't want to do anything more on my phone. It's already taking up too much of my time, too much of a distraction. So why do I need to buy a new phone? Or if I do buy a new phone, why do I need to buy the most expensivest phone that there is? And this is our protest. This is the best way for us to fight some of these really terrible business practices. So everything that we're going to be talking about, all of our links, all of the show notes, all of that housekeeping will be available on this week's blog post, somegadgetguy.com. I keep a list of all these running links, and I hope that these are stories that you're going to follow up on. Let me get this out of the way here. Oh yeah, McCorcoran, exactly. I just recently deleted a bunch of my Google Drive storage so I don't have to keep patronizing Google One. And I started switching to things like Proton Mail and I don't know what Tuta, T-U-T-A is. But I will maybe offline pick your brain. I now use an open source gallery app and an open source weather app. So I'm using an open source gallery app. I don't really care. I live in Southern California. It's going to be hot or it's going to be like gray in the morning. So I don't really check weather that often unless I'm traveling. But the other one that I'm really trying to build, I tried to do a replacement for Google Photos with Image, and that did not work at all. But there's another open source program where you can kind of run your own server client. And I'm hoping I can run that server client, point it to my NAS where I store all of our photos, not just the ones we share with family, and then use something that's run locally, but then has access to our internet connection that then I can use as a Google Photos replacement. So I mean, it's actually a really fun and satisfying project when you can say, hey, I put all these pieces together, and you know what? Like, it's either the same or sometimes it's worse, but most of the time it's better than the cloud services that I was paying for. I think I can cancel these subscriptions, and that's fine. So, I want to kick off with just one quick news article that we need to keep an eye on because there's a ruling that's going to be handed down shortly. We're going to see the impact of this very, very soon. This is from CNN Business. Hold on, let me screen share here. Google cut Uncle Sam a $2 million check so it could avoid a jury trial, and a judge agreed. From the article, the case regarding Google's advertising technology is the first antitrust suit against a big tech company brought by the Biden administration. U.S. District Judge, I believe this is Leonie Brinkema, I think it's Leonie Brinkema, decision on Friday is a setback for the Justice Department, which sought a jury trial for the case. Brinkema ruled in Google's favor after the tech company argued that the check for $2.3 million, according to a Google spokesperson, settled the government's claim for damages and that a jury was no longer needed to try the case. So now a hearing is set for June 21st on Google's motion for summary dismissal, which would terminate the case without a trial. And if that's not granted, then a bench trial is set for September, and then this evidence doesn't go before a jury, it's decided on by a judge. And I believe it's this judge, who's an 80-year-old woman, probably saw that $2 million check and, oh, $2 million. Why, back in my day, that was half the GDP of California. So that's plenty for damages. This is an antitrust case regarding Google's search and advertising business, how they've become the de facto monopoly of the entire internet as it pertains to search and advertising, with potential damages for businesses and consumers to the tune of billions of dollars and a decade of unfair business practices, of anti-consumer, antitrust, and anti-competition business practices. And when we look at the juggernaut that Google has become, one of the areas that I am consistently most disappointed in is their search business and their YouTube and advertising businesses. I don't see how anyone looks at that data, the brief from the DOJ, and says, you know what? Google hurt tons of people, hurt tons of businesses. Their search is a raging dumpster fire right now. You know what'll cover it? You know what's probably going to fix this problem? I don't know, like 2 million. Now, let's just kind of think back. Google's search business, their search and advertising business, last quarter, not last year, last quarter pulled in roughly $60 billion in revenue. This $2 million check to cover the damages is going to be made up in hours of profit, not days, not weeks, not a year of profit. This is not even a rounding error in Google's quarterly financials. And that anyone would think that this was an impressive concession to absolve Google of putting their evidence before a jury is a deluded position that I can only lay at the feet of an 80-year-old judge who has no concept of the damage that they've just done to this disclosure and to the entire legal system, the practice of law in how we assess damages from massive corporations. Nick Gay, while that lady may be 80, we shouldn't disrespect her age. I'm not disrespecting the fact that she made it to 80 years old. I'm disrespecting the fact that she seems to be over this seems to be over her head. As a judge and as an 80-year-old judge at this circuit, at this level, managing these types of cases, I'm sure she has a great legal track record. This is not who we need deciding the future of complex digital marketplace situations. In the same way that I think a lot of us are probably not thrilled that for the next United States of America presidential election, we're dealing with a pair of octogenarians. How do we affect change and manage progress when we keep putting these incredibly important decisions in the hands of octogenarians? We need to move forward with people who have a more practical understanding of how this stuff works and the ramifications of this kind of technology and how we are going to start the process of regulating these industries. So I think there's plenty to point to when we look at a generation of people who will not relinquish power. I don't mean to sound like some kind of radical, but I've often given talks and presentations to high school students. I work with a couple of friends of mine from my high school days who have become teachers. And we talk about things like hearing health and net neutrality. And often I'm talking to high schoolers who couldn't be more disinterested in an old guy like me waving my fist from my lawn. But inevitably, some kind of conversation comes up about Gen Xers and us elder millennials. I'm right on the cusp of Gen X to millennial. And I've gotten numerous questions from kids about, well, how come you guys didn't do more? And you're like, well, we were in an irrelevant voting block. We kept believing that eventually old people would go away and we would get power. But that's not how power is transitioned. You take power through some kind of demographic voting block. And I'm telling high schoolers, as soon as you can vote and as soon as you can participate, and before you're able to vote, you can go out there and campaign and canvass and show up to school board meetings and town halls and everything with your local government to affect change. You will never be given power. You have to take the power by showing up. Whoever shows up gets to make the decisions. And unfortunately for people my age, we're still acquiescing to people twice our age. Only now, that's not 60, that's 80. I very much question her effectiveness in this case. Her ability to reason out what is going on, what is happening, and what the potential damages might be if she's impressed by a $2 million check, so that Google does not need to present their case in front of a jury. I can't pull that punch. I really have to let that one fly. So, June 21st. June 21st, we'll see if Google is going to get out of what I think is a very effective case from the DOJ. I think there's a lot that we need to see, and the disclosures are what's critical. Once we learn how Google does business through these courtroom decisions and courtroom disclosures, that helps us set the stage for the next generation of laws and regulations. If we don't get access to that data and it's never published publicly, then we just never know. It's a black box and Google can do whatever they want. I'm a big fan of certain divisions within Google. I very much have issues with how the entire corporate architecture and structure and the executive leadership are leading these divisions. And we need to be able to separate that out. I've met way too many passionate, intelligent, curious, problem-solving engineers and developers at Google. My beef is not with the people that are showing up every day to try and make their products better. What my beef is at the top, that C-suite, the executive level, and sort of a directionless Google that can't seem to pick a lane and instead is now trying to squeeze both end users and businesses for additional value for their shareholders. Even the companies advertising with Google are no longer the customers. They're the ones getting squeezed for increasing stock prices and the value for investors. And that's a completely unsustainable business model. If we don't have some guardrails on that economy, it's real bad for everybody. And it's just galling that we still have to keep pointing this stuff out like it's some kind of anti-business sentiment, when really everyone would make more money if we could kind of define some of these roles and what some of the rules and boundaries might be. John Gow. Throwback to all the Senate hearings with the tech CEOs. Man, I actually really need to go back and revisit that one during COVID. Because one, I do have a cut up of all of the times Tim Cook basically perjured himself, because they were under oath. And all of the times where he's like, oh, well, we treat all app developers fairly. No, you really don't. Oh, but we don't bully. Bullying is never a part of our DNA. It absolutely is. And you're like, I've got like a trio of statements where, again, if we had any kind of regulatory industry with a backbone, regulators with spines, Tim Cook would probably have been considered, that it probably would have been that he perjured himself. So I do want to move on. Let me get just another sip of coffee, as man, it's like it feels so strong, and then just like this one little like tickle will hit in the back of my throat, and then I'm coughing all over again. So let me just tamp down on that real quick. Okay, so I do want to move on to what was one of the biggest topics for me over the last week. This was a biggie. I do not understand how anyone. I totally appreciate and agree with the sentiment that Microsoft overstepped. And what's funny is no one really comes rushing to Microsoft's defense. Microsoft has a generationally earned reputation for how they do business and how they pick different products and features. And there was near universal sentiment. I had one guy on Blue Sky who was like, I don't care, privacy's basically dead. And then I had one poop poster on Threads who kept arguing with people. Well, you're not even really seeing like the real product. Windows Recall isn't even out yet. You're only seeing security researchers guess. And then every time he was presented with evidence on how he was wrong, he would just try and divert with a silly little joke. Like, well, no, here's like a TikTok where two Microsoft engineers showed you exactly how insecure it is. I don't even believe TikTok exists, /S. Oh, it's so funny. So he got muted. This one's coming by way of Windows Central, written up by Zach Bowden. Microsoft addresses Windows Recall backlash, promises to fix security issues and make it opt-in. So here's the actual sort of listed changes from Microsoft. First, we are updating the setup experience of Copilot PCs to give people a clearer choice to opt in to saving snapshots using Recall. If you don't proactively choose to turn it on, it will be off by default. Second, Windows Hello enrollment is required to enable Recall. In addition, proof of presence is also required to view your timeline and search in Recall. And third, we are adding additional layers of data protection, including just-in-time decryption, protected by Windows Hello Enhanced Sign-In Security ESS. So Recall snapshots will only be decrypted and accessible when the user authenticates. In addition, we encrypted the search index database. So I have to believe that all of these were always planned. I think Microsoft tripped over their own feet in seeing Apple talking up AI on the MacBook and Google showing off all the crazy stuff that Gemini will probably never really be able to do in the way that they present it during a Google I/O keynote, but it looks really neat and investors get really excited about the AI. And they huddled together and said, we've been burning cash on data centers. We've been paying for incredible amounts of water to cool our data centers. We've invested billions into ChatGPT, and now ChatGPT is going to sign a partnership with Apple. How do we make our AI look cool? Here's one of the features that we can use. And this was another panic addition to make investors happy, ignoring what the potential backlash was probably going to be from consumers. And along the way, they started showing us these Windows recall features that were horrifically insecure, and then detailing all the bad stuff. Like if you use Windows recall, and especially if you've got like a setup like mine, I'm doing 2 to 3 monitors, that would all be getting screenshotted and scraped. So my images and my database would be on the higher end of those storage requirements. Microsoft estimating around 50 gigabytes of storage required to flesh out a period of use with their AI recall. To have Microsoft engineers showing users like, oh no, it's all done on device. Look, I can go into your user app data folder and here's your database, was the dumbest thing they could show. Because they also had Satya Nadella out there saying, oh no, it's going to be so encrypted, so secure, it's going to be like your biometric security data, authentication data. And then literally like in a TikTok, Microsoft engineers are like, nah, it's right here. Look, all these blobs of data. I've got access to them. It took me a minute to like click through all of the C drive folders to get to where all of this data lives. It's not okay to look at these and say, well, see, Microsoft is going to fix this. This was such a stupid blunder that never should have happened in the first place. This is a company whose executives seem to be buffered from the rest of their employees and completely isolated from the consumers they're selling these products to. And even, dang it, that cough got away from me. Even with these updates and these policy changes, it still doesn't change one of the issues that's going to befall consumers using recall. Is that if I send you any kind of information, or you look up an email of mine from years ago that had some kind of personal data in it, it's now going to be stored in your recall. And I have to hope that your system is secured with my data in it. There is no way for me to opt out of your Windows recall. Even with these security enhancements, which are very good, positive steps, I eventually want there to be some kind of my system learns about me and can improve my interactions on the system type of AI. I want there to be Star Trek or the movie Her. But showing us that you took security and the opt-in nature of this as an afterthought does not instill me with confidence that you're really going to protect this beyond just, is someone else's computer vaguely secure? Which we know too many family and friends and coworkers who don't do a good job of their own personal data security. And now they're also going to be saving my information and my communication on their systems. And if their systems aren't secure, my information is still at risk. So I feel like these were good steps. I'm going to be showing twofold. As you set up your system, how do you make sure that Windows recall is disabled? Should be pretty easy, according to this blog post. And then I'm going to turn it on to then show, if you have turned it on, how do you disable it? We are in an era right now where I can go on threads and listen to people complain about Microsoft OneDrive. If you run a Windows PC, you get all these annoying prompts, or maybe stuff is getting backed up to a OneDrive account, and you can see in your taskbar, OneDrive is like syncing files, and where does it go, and what's going on. And no one seems to know that if you don't want Microsoft backing up all of your folders, or if you're not paying for a terabyte of storage for all of this data to be sort of hoovered up by OneDrive, you can just uninstall OneDrive. And I had, again, with a tech enthusiast, a buddy, someone, a good friend, someone who should kind of know about this stuff, saying, well, yeah, every time I try and disable OneDrive, it freaks out and it tells me I can only disable it for like an hour or a day, or it acts like I'm unplugging something core or vital. And you're like, yeah, you're going through the OneDrive app to try and turn off that sync. Just uninstall the app. Everyone in this chat right now, if you run a Windows PC, go uninstall OneDrive. It's not, Microsoft isn't going to do anything to you. It's not going to like, oh, it's a black mark on your permanent tech record. Oh, you uninstalled the OneDrive. If you need to back up files, create your own kind of cloud organization, and then just open up a browser and dump the file in there. Really, the only OneDrive sync that I really allow up and running is Microsoft Word. Word and Excel. Those are basically as cloud-based as I let Microsoft get. Everything that I've ever written actually doesn't live on my PC. It's up in my OneDrive. I mean, I've got articles going back, God, I'm so old. I think I've got the original write-ups to our movie review show back in 2008, when we started writing up our notes on movies you may have missed. Everything has always just lived on Microsoft's cloud for that. And that's it. OneDrive is not installed. Actually, I don't think I can screen share right now. That's weird. Anyway. So, yeah, go Starscream, of course, because Microsoft wants you to use it. Go Starscream says, I've uninstalled the app before, but it still ended up showing back up again later. So uninstall it again. Again, like, think about every single time you interact with OneDrive, that's seconds out of your day, right? But if you're interacting with OneDrive more than like once a month to disable it or turn it off or something like that, just uninstall it. And every single time you uninstall it, it will eventually come back in some kind of update, like a major update, like what's coming out for 24H2. But uninstall it again. And then you don't have to mess with it until it reinstalls itself at some later date. I do want to get to these last couple stories here. Again, this is another follow-up, something we need to keep an eye on. Let me get this out of the way here. Epic Games judge tells Apple she wants all of its decision-making documents. This is written up by Ben Lovejoy over at 9to5Mac. The judge in the Apple versus Epic Games case has told the Cupertino company that she wants to see all of the company's documents relating to its revised App Store policies, and she has strongly emphasized that she means all of them. It follows earlier remarks in which she strongly implied that Apple was guilty of bad faith compliance with the antitrust ruling she made in 2021. So this is coming back. The Apple versus Epic case largely went Apple's way with some minor legal concessions to Epic's arguments. Epic won their case against Google because Google executives were kind of dumb enough to spell out the ways that they were harming competition. I'm grossly oversimplifying a very complex legal process. But in that interim, Apple was on the hook for changing some of their business practices in regards to how the App Store functioned. And wouldn't you know it, Apple's now getting sued by the DOJ for anti-consumer and anti-competitive business practices. And now we're revisiting some of those court decisions from 2021 to see if Apple really is living up to their side of this arrangement. So now we've got to keep an eye on how this is all going down. And this kind of follow-up is exactly, again, like I was saying with Google and their jury trial over search and advertising, this is how we build legal precedent. This is how we say, vaguely, when we look at this evidence, the courts and a jury say, this is okay and this isn't. It's kind of a gray area, so we've got to set a loose framework, and then we start refining it, and then maybe it requires a new law to protect this kind of business practice or to dissuade excuse me, companies from doing this kind of bad faith dealing. Apple over the last year has been nothing but bad faith in responding to EU regulations and replying to United States court cases. It's like they take the letter of every single new rule that's presented to them and they find the weakest, stretchiest, out there interpretation of that rule, which then further enhances their business and further degrades competition and consumer trust. There's no way around this. At some point, we need to actually say things and mean them, like If you don't like how this company does business with you as a consumer, you do need to vote with your wallet. It's a very bad look. And unfortunately, I don't think we're due a proper course correction until more of this information actually makes it out to Apple customers. It's only when Apple customers realize how much they've been hurt by Apple business practices that we'll see any kind of change. So long as it's like appealing to some kind of tech goodwill, like, oh, you know, green bubble, blue bubble, this hurts kids in school. Oh, we'll just buy your kids' iPhones. Like, you'll never win appealing to someone's better nature. But you will completely poison the well if you can show those people they're being hurt. Oh, well, now it matters because it's affecting my pocketbook. Yeah, I guess. You could have been on board and you could have headed this off when we were all complaining about it. But yes, now you're being hurt. So I guess it's time for you to care. Good job. Good job there, buddy. So that's another one that we have to... Where is the... I do not know when this was supposed to be enacted. I'm gonna follow up on this one specifically. I really do want to see what the sort of ramifications or the judgment from this judge might be, but I don't have a date on when Apple is supposed to meet this requirement and comply with this judge's order. So we'll just have to keep an eye out. But it will be followed up on in a future episode of this rambling, hilarious tech podcast. Okay. Okay, lastly, I just wanted to quickly touch. First of all, I was just kind of stoked to see a Life Hacker article pop up in one of my news catchers. I just haven't seen a lot of action from Life Hacker lately. This is another one, just another bad look for a company making some stupid decisions with their terms of service. Adobe has responded to criticism of its new terms of service. Adobe isn't stealing your work, but it's definitely accessing it. And so this is a follow-up article to the first publication. Adobe is changing up their terms of service. People have been looking through the new agreement, and there's been concerns over some of the language and how Adobe might use, scan, and access people's files. I am a little split on this one. First of all, I would just recommend reading up, like from Adobe's own blog post, what their claim is. Because even in Adobe's blog post, there's a lot that I go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then they purposely crouch very specific pieces of language. Kind of makes it look like Adobe's trying to get away with something while they're explaining how they're not trying to get away with something. So, one of the major changes is you have no control when you use someone else's storage. I want to take it back, and I'm not being cheeky with this, and I apologize for anyone who is emotionally affected or triggered by these kinds of topics, but Apple tried to build a back door into the iPhone so that the iPhone would report on users that were sharing abuse materials, CSAM. That was their big pitch. In my opinion, and we do not have any data to verify that this was Apple's plan or their business practice, no disclosures from executives, I'm guessing here. Apple was looking at how much they pay other services like Adobe and Google and Microsoft for cloud storage and server space for their own iCloud, because they don't run all of their own data centers. And every time you upload something to the cloud, you are giving up some of your control and some of your right to privacy. Your data living on someone else's server, that server is subject to the laws and regulations regarding things like the distribution of abuse materials. So Apple, being one of the most profitable companies of all time, looked at their current arrangement and said, hey, you know what? Instead of our servers doing the scanning, which is CPU time per image that's uploaded to iCloud, what if we just had the users' computers do it instead? And then we would save a ton of money on this necessary practice. Everything you upload to a cloud service is probably getting examined to some degree. That's just the way cloud works. They cannot be held liable for the content that's distributed through their system, so they have to be aware of what's being uploaded to their servers. So Apple is cheap. Why not offload those scanning requirements? And again, it's a marginal increase in the usage on the user's device, but for every single photo and video that gets uploaded to iCloud, that would be a substantial savings in how their servers are required to kind of sift through this information. But it also builds a literal backdoor into the iPhone that authoritarian governments could easily tap into, and it becomes a security risk because you can't really secure a hole in a phone's operating system like that. For as much as Apple likes to say, oh, well, we button all this up in privacy, it's the iPhone. Like, it's not really any more secure than any other computing platform. And in many ways, it's less secure because of the way that Apple markets security. A part of this, I totally understand. If you're using Adobe Creative Cloud and you're not saving your projects on your own home system, you're relying on that cloud storage and cloud distribution, then Adobe actually does have a legal requirement and obligation to sift through anything that's uploaded to their servers to make sure that you're not distributing terrible crap through their infrastructure. That's just the way that goes. Now, what gets a little hinky, though, is how they specifically say in their blog post that they are not going to train the Firefly generative AI model on your data. Now, that is very specific. They're referencing one specific Gen AI modeling language learning model, because they're probably using your data to train other things. So legally, they're technically correct. Your data is not going into the feature improvements and to the generative models that this one AI slice has access to. But they're probably doing everything else. So you can go in and say, and again, you've been opted in. If you're on Adobe Creative Cloud, go into your user preferences, and if you haven't opted out, then you are probably still submitting data to Adobe's infrastructure, and they're profiting off of your information, and they're using your content and your projects to help other platforms and services and models and features and plugins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm not dismissing the concerns, because a part of this is also just bubbling up from people who weren't paying attention to their relationship with Adobe on previous versions of their terms of service. When it comes to the cloud, our consumer base is woefully undereducated as to what their actual rights and their calls for privacy really entail. You have none. If I put one of my files on your computer, you can promise that you're not going to look at it, but I have no control over that. My data is on your computer. That's on me. If I wanted to secure it and I wanted to make sure that you couldn't look at the data in this little bucket that I gave you, I shouldn't give you the bucket. If it's that sensitive or that important or that critical, I need to keep the bucket and not give it to you for you to store it on your PC. That's a part of the consumer education that's been completely lost. And especially in this way that we kind of dumb things down for those wacky creative people. You know what I mean? We kind of belittle and talk down to artists and musicians and filmmakers and painters and photographers. Because, well, don't worry about all that pesky techie stuff. You need to get in there and make your art. Well, no, now in the 21st century economy, it really does matter how you distribute, how you save, how you collaborate. And these cloud tools get to assume a certain relationship that I don't think all of these consumers realize that that's really what they're paying for. When you pay your monthly subscription fee to Adobe, that's what you're signing up for. So, Pup on Tech, Adobe doing something bad. I am shocked. Shocked, I tell you, shocked. And JMan150, we got 1 more minute until WWDC. Actually, I think we just hit 10 a.m. on the dot. So we're going to go ahead and start wrapping this up. Let me take 1 more drink of water, and I'm going to step on WWDC just a little bit here. Okay, so I am not particularly interested. I'm not going to do any kind of co-stream or reaction or live tweeting or live blogging. I really feel WWDC is going to do a couple of things. All of the announcements coming to the iPhone are going to be how can we make the iPhone more like an Android? And a bunch of Apple stands are going to cluck along and see, oh, look, now you can do all these really cool things. And they were always cool, and you always could have done them if you'd had an Android. That seems to be the only direction Apple has left in making the iPhone better, is to give it more of the features that we just take for granted in Android land, but then also put like pretty polish on your home screen and your lock screen or something like that. I think we're going to hear precious little about MacBooks. I think Apple is showing us and telling us viciously how Macs don't make them enough money, so they're trying to push more and more consumers into an even more locked down ecosystem like the iPad. The M4 chip going to the iPad first is kind of an indication that Apple doesn't really care about the laptop market as much now that we've seen that kind of peak of MacBook sales. And people aren't flipping their M1s and M2s to get the M3s and M4s. Well, got to move them over to iPads. And then those iPads are way more disposable than the MacBooks. People will flip their iPads probably more frequently than they'll flip their MacBook if that's their primary computer. What's a computer? I bet you will see some Apple TV OS updates, just again, incorporating better voice and search interaction, stuff like that. And then I'd be very surprised if we didn't hear something about Apple Watch, again, as it relates to how Siri plugs into AI models and how you can control that from your wrist. But I think one of the unknowns, something that I don't know if Apple's really going to address or if this will be a big part of their presentation, it's kind of one or the other, is Vision Pro is going to start going on sale in other regions. Vision Pro sales in the United States have been pretty disappointing. It has not taken off as the future of Apple integrations and software and AR and VR. It is exactly what it is. It's a really expensive dev kit for a product that Apple doesn't know how to position to consumers and doesn't have a killer app for. There is no reason to get a Vision Pro, except to make apps for the Vision Pro. So that's what I'm really going to be curious to see. How much time do they spend talking up the changes to Vision Pro, or will the changes coming to Vision OS basically just be the same kinds of feature improvements and AI improvements that are coming to the iPhone and the iPad? And that to me is a damning position for the Vision Pro. Because if it's just an iPad you wear on your face, that's not a compelling product at $3,500 when it has an M2 processor in it. It doesn't have an M3. It doesn't have an M4. That's going to come to a future version of the Vision Pro headset. That's a bad place to be if you're about to drop roughly $4,000 on a face computer that is now going to be 2 generations of technology older in terms of processing power and compute load. So, Barry Johnson, AI is now Apple intelligence. Do. Jojo the Techies, she's taken off to go right up and focus on WWDC. I think we all need to kind of tap this out too before my voice completely fails again. Let me get this out of the way here. J-Man with 50 is already giving us updates. He's now talking about the 5th anniversary of Apple TV. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. Apologies for the shorter show, but I kind of needed to rest my voice a little bit. So this is just a nice little bit of timing that Apple is stepping on my podcast. They're very rude like that. If you think about it, Apple is definitely a bully. So, folks, stay tuned. There's a ton of really cool tech content streaming throughout the week. Gadget Goddess on Tuesdays. Eric, Easy Computer Solutions, the Tech Preacher on Wednesdays. I'm still hoping to see some of our friends like maybe a Scott Peachy or an Ike, someone come back to streaming on Thursdays, but TK and I are probably going to be streaming Thursday night. LaShawn on Fridays. We've got El Jefe Reviews and Nomad Tech Project over the weekend. You can get your fill. Tons of really fun conversations, lots to participate with, and not the same kind of hack, big mainstream talking points where people just roll over and tell everybody that Apple is the bestest because of unfair business practices and anti-consumer, anti-competition crap. So, I want you to do awesome with your technology. I want you to be awesome with your technology, and I'll catch you back here next week for another episode of the Monday Morning Tech Chat Show on the SGGQA podcast channel. Be safe. Take care. I love y'all. I'll catch you back.